Okay, we're back. We're live in San Francisco. We have two events going on, one in Vegas, EMC World, and one here in San Francisco. This is theCUBE, SiliconANGLE.tv's exclusive coverage of the Hadoop ecosystem. I'm John Furrier, the founder of SiliconANGLE.com, and I'm joined here with the new VP of Marketing, Peter Ellis Cooper. Cooper Ellis. Congratulations on your new role. You're taking over as a VP of Engineering from Amr Awadallah, who will maintain the CTO position. You guys announced that news today?
Yep, I went out this morning.
So Cloudera now has grown to have hundreds and hundreds of employees. There's no official statement on the number, but through my extensive research, I'm pegging the number at 250 plus, give or take 10. 260
That's
maybe?
Pretty close.
Very close, I'm almost, I've been involved in Cloudera since they were founded. I got to know the founders early on at the office, so watching Cloudera grow up has been a great experience for me, and got to know a lot of good friends there. And so Amr Awadallah, as the founder, managing engineering, I noticed he was kind of stressed out last time I was in the office. He was working late, and as the founder, that's a lot of engineering going on. A lot of, close to 70 plus engineers I hear, and a busy schedule.
He was the first guy I met when I went in there.
Yeah, great.
We talked for hours. It was great.
Amr's a fantastic founder, great technical founder, great individual, great integrity. Big fan of Amr. But let's talk about Cloudera's engineering environment. Obviously, you really can't add much. You're only 2 days on the job.
Second day.
But you've had to go through the interview process. You've been vetted. I'm sure you talked to the board members. I'm sure you talked to all the personnel there. And it's a tough hire at Cloudera. I know people in the past in other positions. They've had great candidates, and sometimes it's not a good fit. So talk about what's happening at Cloudera that got you so excited to leave your job at VMware to come here.
Yeah. It's a great opportunity, obviously, right? And I've been working in the middleware space, which is kind of adjacent space for years, and got really interested in the interaction of data and apps. And I started looking at how they were scaling across commodity hardware to build out these Hadoop clusters, and started looking at, wow, there's a lot of data out there. And the opportunity to help customers be successful with that is really what started me on this whole thing. And then when I got in, I met Amr and I started meeting the guys on the team. I was like, these guys are building a team that's built to last.
Yeah.
And that's what really got me excited.
I did the first video. It was kind of a recruiting video in our first CUBE studio. Had these hanging balls from IKEA in the back of the Cloudera office, and it was Chad, who's now at Wibby Data, Charles, and Amr, and Eli. And they're talking about how great it was as a culture, and that video is still on their website, I believe, and they've continued to build that DNA in the culture of Cloudera, high quality individuals, and they've attracted some real high-end scientists and computer scientists, so they've done a good job. Okay, let's talk about what you've done. Okay, so you worked at SpringSource, a very famous acquisition by VMware.
Right.
When Paul Maritz came over to VMware, VMware was basically almost like an Oracle model, license, focused on the enterprise. Back when virtualization, that's all they could do is charge for licenses.
Right.
And and that wasn't going over well. As virtualization started growing, customers are unhappy paying for licenses for VMware. Paul Maritz comes in, lays out a stack, and says, hey, we need to bring something in here. That was SpringSource. So that was an open source project. Talk about your role in SpringSource.
Yeah, so I ran engineering at SpringSource, and the acquisition by VMware was really a big game changer for VMware, right? Because it's the first time they really did a big acquisition and stepped out of the infrastructure space into apps. On both sides of that, there was a lot of things to get right during that that transition. But going back, Spring was really built around open source projects and working in the community, and then assembling a platform out of open source components to basically meet enterprise customer needs. So some of the same challenges applied there.
What did you learn at SpringSource? Because really SpringSource was, open source is growing. I'm calling it third generation open source because I'm old enough to call it third generation. But post Unix, Linux, whatever you want to call version of that, stuff coming out of BSD, history and Unix. It was successful. You guys are attracted a lot of talent at SpringSource. You deliver a lot of value. At the same time, you balance the contributions to open source. What did you learn in that experience, and how to balance a commercial operation and
Right.
be an actor and a participant in a
Right.
community?
Right. That's the trick, right? I mean, same thing at Spring Source as we've got here at Cloudera, which is, it's all about the open source community that you're building off of and the contributions to that community, participating in the community. You've got to do that and be a good citizen. And if you're successful in doing that, you can move the innovation forward in those projects and contribute to do that. But the trick is you've got to balance that with paying the rent and keeping the lights on, right? So there's a lot of customers that need to be taken care of, and making those trade-offs between what does this customer need versus what's the right thing to do for the open source, can be challenging, and that's the kind of stuff that I'm really interested in. So.
Where have you seen companies, and you don't have to name names, but where people have failed being successful in open source? What have you noticed if you look at the carnage and some of the wreckage?
What you see is, if you see companies that sort of, they'll make a contribution to open source, but it's not a real commitment, right? Or they might put something out there that they're not really committed to. And, they'll start a project and then put it out in open source as an afterthought. The right way to do it is to really be involved, have the project in the open from the start, let the community be involved, you contribute, and it's a partnership, right? And so, there's a real difference between building something in the open source and just kind of putting something out there.
I was talking with Eli Collins, who's one of the early engineers at Cloudera. He's also ex-VMware. And we'll come back to your VMware experience because it's a kind of interesting story. You got open source with Spring Source, then you go to the commercial entity VMware, which is owned by EMC. So I want to talk about that. But let's talk about what Eli and I were talking earlier in the hallway. I said, Eli, what are you working on now? And after we were talking about all these changes, and it's just a lot of code. The volume of shipping is high.
At
Cloudera, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're constantly shipping updates and changes. What did you think of that? I mean, were you blown away by that?
Yeah, it's partly because there's a very active open source community, Apache community around, the Hadoop projects. So you can do a lot more, right? And there's a lot of activity, and there's a lot of pieces that need to be assembled. And part of the value that Cloudera brings, right, is you've got to assemble those components, test them, and make sure that they're going to meet the enterprise software bar. And part of what I think Eli's talking about there is that when you have a lot of customers, as Cloudera does today, you got a lot of different people with different needs, and in not all cases the open source doesn't necessarily meet their needs, so you have to tweak it or do something special. And then the trick is that's got to go back into the open source and be integrated.
So when you rolled into VMware from Spring Source, obviously different culture. VMware is, very commercial focused, great technical people as well. What did you do there? Was it different? What projects did you work on there?
At VMware, it was, we were also managing the open source project Spring, but also we had some commercial software that we brought in through acquisitions in the later stages of Spring Source. So again, it was a balance between the open source and working in the open source community.
Did you have a chance to have some successes in that new engineering environment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you share with the folks some of the projects?
We brought some, the Spring Framework projects, a huge community of, millions of users around Spring, and we were able to introduce some runtime components into that platform and take those to market as part of a suite which we introduced at VMware. And the idea, with VMware was to bring that community of developers onto the VMware platform, and then use the VMware channel to introduce that platform to a broader market. And that was very successful.
Okay, so my final question is: we got our next guest lining up. I can see them all queuing up like airplanes at the airport on a rainy day. Why did Cloudera want you? What was the reason for the new VP of hiring you? Was it the fact that there's just so much work to do that is now, I'm not saying Amr didn't work full time, but I know he's super busy doing a lot of evangelist work and business is growing like crazy. What was the core thing? Was it like, okay, Peter, we need you to run ops? Is it more just keeping the troops trains run on time? Was it more different perspective from because the fact you had the open source thing, all of the above? What was the?
I think the part that really goes back to is Mike's got this vision and Amar's got the same vision of building a team that's really built to last, right? And they wanted somebody who had built teams successfully before. That could help that team make those trade-offs and grow and build a team that could really carry a large engineering initiative and a large customer base forward.
It's a large operation. Now you're talking
big.
About schedules, you're balancing the open source, and they got to actually ship some code,
commercial
code.
Absolutely.
They got the core Cloudera products.
Yeah, and it's it's an exceptional team. I mean, I've spent a lot of time interviewing with these guys, and they're a great team.
I'm sure they're going to get higher too, more numbers, and
sure,
you have a full organization. You got an organizational behavior strategy. You got to
absolutely.
have
succession
strategy.
Preserve that culture, right? These guys have set an amazing culture.
Set objectives.
You've got to maintain that culture and allow the team to scale up without losing the good stuff that you had when you're in the startup.
What have you learned as an engineering manager, executive, is the best practice in your mind? What's your philosophy on how to manage a team? Because you got a lot of young guys coming in, you have a lot of young experience, and a lot of, younger guys coming in, you have experienced guys in there. You got to set reviews, you got to keep people on schedule.
Yeah.
What's your philosophy in herding the cats, as some say? And these guys are wild cards too, the open source guys. You know who they are out there. They're good citizens, but at the same time, they got causes. They really truly, it's passionate.
So the thing
about, how do you herd those cats?
So people who are passionate respond to the same. My experience is people who are passionate respond to the same things that I respond to, which is be who you do what you say you're going to do and follow through and be yourself. And provide leadership by, example. I've built these products before, been around these kind of teams, and a lot of it is just, staying focused, staying with the program, recognizing people for their contribution, allowing people to grow, give them exposure to different opportunities.
It sounds so simple, really does.
At the end of the day, a lot of it comes back to the simple stuff, I think.
Okay, Peter Cooper Ellis, the new VP of Engineering at Cloudera. Welcome inside theCUBE for the first time.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
Good
luck with everything. We'll be right back with our next guest after this short break.
Thanks.